Thanks for having me. So where are we? The 2020s mark a dynamic shift in the business of aviation. Firstly, there's the fallout of COVID, and airlines have got to continue to look to the future, try to determine where they're going to be in 1, 2, or 3 quarters. It's really uncertain right now. And despite this uncertainty, a few things are becoming quite clear, at least for the near term. So we have the apparent success of new vaccines, and sorry, I've got the wrong accent to describe that. The outlook for business travel is very mixed. So consumers are staying closer to home, they're making shorter journeys and they're driving more. And we have passengers that are needing more flexible terms. Cleanliness and social distancing is going to be a priority now in airports. But secondly, there's the need to improve the environmental impact across all industries, and that's being pushed hard by governments and regulators. So the science is really clear. If we don't do this now, we could be faced with economic and social challenges that make COVID look like a walk in the park. And finally, we've got more stress on the people. Tens of thousands of people have lost their jobs, and those remaining are under a lot of pressure. So I'm here to talk about this and argue that operational efficiency is a step forward to alleviating some of these commercial, social, and environmental challenges and doing it really quickly. Next slide, please. So the evidence is really clear. New operational efficiency practices offer the means to tackle those 3 challenges I mentioned earlier. And on top of this, the behavioral change is arguably the quickest and most effective way to achieve this, but we have to do it well. So we've got loads of, so what? We've got loads of analytics platforms that are doing this, but we know despite this information, we're not making more efficient decisions. Next slide, please. So who are we? Who am I talking to you? Many of our team, we come from academia, and particularly the field of behavioral economics, which has been touched upon earlier. And without going into too much detail, effectively this means understanding human decision-making and how that affects the irrationality of rational models. So in many industries, for instance, when we control for all external factors that affect performance, we still see huge differences in performance from the most efficient people to the least. And these differences can only be explained by management practices. And also from a behavioral perspective, we know that over 95% of the decisions that we make are unconscious. So we're being pushed and pulled by our environment a lot more than what we think. And behavioral economics applies this science that lies behind these irrational choices, to policies, products, and research. So to Christian's point, some of the best data which tells us what decisions are being made is rich now. We're at a point in time where we really are starting to understand these decisions. And some of these decisions are related to energy and fuel. And those data points also happen to tell us about carbon and greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants that come from those. So the impact on aviation from a behavioral standpoint and a research standpoint is fantastic. And so some of the earliest and most famous experiments and studies in changing behavior are energy and fuel related. So how do we change behavior? Well, I don't want to repeat what Doug said. It was a fantastic presentation, and I'm just going to reiterate and say context is everything. But ultimately, how do we know what works? And using experimentation to evaluate our work, such as randomized control trials, gives us a very rigorous way to move forwards. So for instance, the use of social comparisons to help with household energy use, and I'll show you this in a second, may not be so effective in helping employees in being more efficient. So we have to be very clear and understand what works. Next slide, please. This is an example of how powerful nudges can be. This was a really famous trial, which my co-founder was involved with. It was also with a chap by the name of Richard Thaler from the University of Chicago and the Behavioral Insights team in the UK. If you can find out about this paper, it's called The Behavioralist as a Tax Collector. Effectively, the UK government were trying to collect taxes or unpaid taxes from the public, and they were using behavioral economics or behavioral science to try and increase the propensity to pay. And the example that you see in front of you is the use of a nudge called a social norm. And what we're doing here is effectively comparing people to their community or their peers. And the only difference between those two letters is that one sentence. 9 out of people pay their tax on time. The difference in tax collected between those two letters was £2.4 million in 23 days. So every single one of those words is worth a fortune. And so the point here is that when you do this right, you can really knock the ball out of the park. It can be very, very powerful. So great, we have a solution. So why don't we apply this to all of our problems? Why don't we compare smokers to each other to stop smoking, or compare politicians to each other to stop wars? I mean, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but what I do want to say is that this is grounded in context. So as I mentioned earlier, these social comparisons might work in helping people to pay their taxes on time, but they might not be so good in helping people to save fuel in the airport space. Agency is different, and that's where we really need to understand. Next slide, please. So bringing Doug's point, this absolutely has to be personal. We have to design information for the user's preferences, not just the organizations. And this also means making sure that personal data is respected and, where necessary, encrypted. And then, as I mentioned earlier, what about what works? We have to always seek the opportunity to apply experimentation, which is key. Next slide, please. So bringing this background to sustainability, is operational efficiency enough? Well, the short answer is no. As you can see on the graph here, as a carbon reduction solution, for aviation alone, operational efficiency across the whole sector is the red line here, or the red space, only takes a very small slice of the problem. But is it a solution that's ready for now? Yes, it is. And according to the latest IPCC report, we have only till 2030 to miss the first runaway climate change tipping point, which is the 1.5 degree, 2 degrees Celsius global temperature rise. So arguably, operational efficiency is extremely important to address right now for this particular sector. I'd be happy to dig into the environmental side of this in Q&A, but ultimately, behavioral change and operational efficiency offers a low cost and high impact means of achieving these goals. Next slide, please. So for us, and for my organization, this became apparent with a study that our team undertook with Virgin Atlantic in 2014 to 16 with the University of Chicago and London School of Economics. This was the first time randomized control trial in aviation. And I just want to explain here the detail behind how powerful this could be in practice. Airline captains were provided with feedback about their performance against discrete behaviors. This, for reference, was discretionary fuel calculations, actual flight versus planned fuel use, and reduced engine taxi-in. We were measuring all those behaviors, and we were able to provide feedback to captains on the flights that they were operating. We then randomized 335 captains into 4 groups, and with 1 as a control group who received nothing, and the 3 remaining received different contextual changes to their feedback based upon the academic literature. And we sent them letters once a month. And the results were mind-blowing. In 8 months, we saved $6.1 million worth of fuel. And this was the lowest ever abatement cost to reduce carbon in any industry in history. And it gets even better. One of the groups that we were studying, we were using charitable donations. And over the study, we were basically measuring whether or not there was an improvement in job satisfaction. And that group showed improvements in well-being and job satisfaction, which was the same as moving from poor health to excellent health. So armed with this causal evidence for a win-win-win, we had to scale this. So my noble story is, personally, I quit my previous position and threw everything at this. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we need to move fast, and it would appear that a long-term focus carries risk. As we've seen, there are solutions we've seen today that not only save money, but they save carbon and they improve well-being. 3, being more sustainable makes us more efficient, but it is tough for airlines and airports to decipher what's good and what's not so good. And then finally, what about happiness? These are high-pressure, stressful situations. Can our interventions drive social change as well as commercial and environmental change? Yes, they can. So to conclude, these new solutions can be triple bottom line. They can be low cost, high impact, and a crucial step forward on a low carbon path for aviation. Thank you for listening.